Recently, my dear daughter in Portland, Oregon, Sandra Clark, posted this website for me to take a look at. I believe there are no coincidences in life. Strangely enough, this comes along less than 24 hours ago when I was sitting in a deer camp listening to a father tell me of the suicide of his son. As two grown men who experienced things that neither of us ever wanted to see or do, we cried together. I explained to him that I could actually, on a personal level, sympathize with him and his son. He seemed somewhat taken back, but I told him there were times in my life when I had stared into the abyss. I believe you have to have been in the abyss to understand the depth of despair that anyone can fall. We talked about depression and the terrible impact it can have on a person's ability to think rationally. He suffers from, and his son suffered from depression. His son was bipolar, and when he would take himself off medication, he would spiral down to the bottom, and on his last trip, he didn't make the climb back out. I shared with him my story of a wolf dog, who to this day I miss terribly. A dog that, for whatever reason, on a cold winter day in the mountains of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, literally on the day I had thought about what was the best solution for my own life, was sent to me, I believe, by a higher power, and it changed my life forever. Over the years, I've come to accept that God has a sense of compassion and humor. After all, dog spelled backwards. In the 1980s, I came to be friends with a vet who was also a dentist in Knoxville. I was dating his dental technician. He was married to a very successful and lovely model. He had a lovely home and friends and a great client base. And as he told me one time, everything should be great in my life. However, he also shared that he could never come home. Like many veterans of Vietnam, he had to sneak back into his own country, and he was told not to wear his uniform in public, not because of terrorists, but because his own countrymen dishonored and hated his service. He was called a baby killer and worse. The VA counselors and others told him to get on with his life. The concept of treating PTSD was not yet on anyone's radar. One night, after a day hiking in the mountains and just being guys, we sat and had what would become a life-changing dinner together. I remember that evening. It was in June of 1981, because here we were, two grown men sitting at the Regus restaurant, and we both talked candidly and openly about our lives, something that men just simply often don't do. I was newly divorced and had had my world crushed by having the one love of my life deciding not to pursue the relationship we had shared so intensely. He was coming to terms with the reality that he hated being a dentist. Who could possibly want to bring pain to another person, he would often lament to me. And we both, I think, instinctively knew that he had made up his mind about something. He had paid off all of his debts, he had written a will, given his wife anything that she had asked for. They had no children. At 34 years old, by all outward appearances, he was a happy-go-lucky, very successful, and highly respected member of his community. That evening, he asked me if I was familiar with what a CAO was and how did they work and what they had to do when they did go to work. A CAO is a Casualty Assistance Officer for the military, although they may go by different names and acronyms in different branches. I told him that sadly, yes, I was familiar with those job duties. My friend simply asked me if I'd be willing to handle such duties for him. I agreed, only if he agreed to handle my situation. After all, I was 30 and he was 34. How soon could such a responsibility come to be? We laughed and we talked about writing our own eulogies and agreed to deliver them for whichever of us went first because we were pretty sure we'd be the only ones that would say something nice about each other. At that time in my life, I had never delivered or written a eulogy. 6 months to the day, on December the 1st, 1981, I handled my duties for, we'll call him Lieutenant Dan, as Forrest Gump's partner in Forrest Gump the movie. In his eulogy, probably much to his chagrin, I listed his medals and awards, including two Purple Hearts, a Good Conduct Medal, the National Defense Service Medal, the Vietnam Service Medal, the Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal, the Infantry Shoulder Cord, the Combat Infantry Badge, the Expert Badge, and the Meritorious Unit Commendation. He had never told anyone about any of these medals, and I only came to learn of them when I had contacted the VA for assistance in his services. When I helped clean out of his closet, I came across a lockbox, and all the medals were secured there, along with his last will and testament, and a letter to his CAO with specific instructions, one being, please have a bagpiper play Amazing Grace. Fortunately, his wife had also insisted on that being part of his service. I think about Dan often. Now, some 35 years later, I had seen all the signs, but I chose to ignore them, I suppose. But then again, as I told the Father last evening, when a person falls into the abyss, sometimes, irrespective of whatever you do, you can't help them climb out. Perhaps, had we had access to a wolf or a dog rescue sanctuary and taken the time to have gotten involved with it, Lieutenant Dan and I would still be enjoying a fine single malt scotch, a rare steak, and talking about that big buck that got away. Semper Fi, dear Sandra. Semper Fi, Lieutenant Dan. And as Forrest Gump would say, that's all I have to say about that.